What is up guys, it's Cal, and in this video I'm going to be going over Blood Death Knight's current state in the Battle for Azeroth beta. I'll be going over their baseline abilities along with their talents and PvP talents, since those were introduced into the beta. I'll go ahead and say that as far as baseline abilities are concerned, it's well, pretty unchanged. The talents are more changed though, at least compared to how Frost is. Now in this video, I'm not going to be telling you which talents to pick for the most survivability, mainly due to the fact that numbers wise, a lot will change before the final release of BFA. But anyways, let's get started. Now these are all of the baseline abilities for Blood DKs, and since they're relatively unchanged, I'm going to make this pretty short for you guys and just go over what is changed. So Dark Command. It's the exact same, it's your taunt. Death's Advance is new. Well, it's kind of new. We've seen it before in a talent form, but now it's becoming baseline, and it is our speed increase, because as you see, all these baseline abilities, Wraithwalk isn't here, because Wraithwalk is not being baseline anymore. It is being turned into a talent. That goes for all DK specs in BFA. So what Death's Advance does, if you see there, for 8 seconds your movement speed is increased by 30% and you cannot be slowed down below 100% of normal speed. And you're immune to forced movement effects and like knockbacks. And then passively, so if I don't activate this at all, I just can't be slowed below 70% of normal speed. So Death Knight's just can't be slowed below 70% of normal speed, and that is on a 45-second cooldown. Mind Freeze staying the exact same, that's your interrupt. Icebound Fortitude, it is staying the exact same. That is your defensive cooldown. Death and Decay, staying the exact same as well. Blood Boil, which you look at that, it is also the exact same. Vampiric Blood, the percentage there is obviously not right. It says it increases your max health by 3,663%. I used it and then did the math. It is still about a 30% increase to max health, so it's unchanged. Anti-Magic Shell is also unchanged. Asphyxiate, also, it is unchanged. Raise Ally, the only change to it is that it's going to cost 30 runic power versus it currently costing just no runic power on live. So that is, of course, your battle res. Reap magic is new, and it's something that all Death Knights have, as a matter of fact. You reap one beneficial magic effect from the target, removing it, and then granting you 25 runic power, and it's on a 10-second cooldown. So DKs across the board will be getting a purge, and then using said purge gives you 25 runic power. Dancing Rune Weapon is going from a 3-minute cooldown down to a 2-minute cooldown. So that's nice. Control Undead is an odd one because it's getting changed in, well, an odd way. You can now use this on undead targets who are level 70 and lower, and you control them for 5 minutes. So on live, it's currently 111, up to level 111 because the max level is 110, but this will let you use it on targets up to level 70, so not targets level 121. I don't know. Strange change. Anyways, Path of Frost is staying the same. You use it and your group can walk on water. Deathgate, exact same. Death Grip is also unchanged. Death's Caress, also unchanged. Heart Strike is just getting, I guess, a slight nerf. Instead of it reducing your enemy's movement speed by 50%, it will now be 20%. Morrowind is pretty much the same thing. The only thing about Bone Shield is that it's not going to increase your armor by a set percentage. It says a set number there. So I don't know if that varies on your armor, how much armor you have, or if that varies by your level. It's at 358. Let's take off my helmet and see if that number changes. 338. Okay, so it has to do with how much armor you have, so I guess it is still a percentage. Death Strike getting a bit of a buff. It will now heal you for 30% of all damage you take in the last 5 seconds instead of 20%. And then I guess a slight nerf to Gorfine's Grasp is that it will pull all targets within 15 yards of you, because currently on live it's all targets within 20 yards of you, or any friendly or enemy target use Gorfine's Grasp on. So let's look at Rune Forging, which is, if you're Blood, it's not going to be different at all. The only thing that's changed really is Razor Ice is buffed, but you're probably not going to use Razor Ice anyway, because on live this is, I think, 15, or it's like, no, I think it's 10% if you're Blood, but now it's 21%. Fallen Crusader is unchanged. I guess you're gonna go Stone Skin Gargoyle if you want, but that is unchanged anyway. Now let's look at the passives, which are, well, you guessed it, pretty much unchanged. Crimson Scourge is unchanged. The only difference is that they changed the icon for it for whatever reason. Your Mastery is unchanged. Whenever you use Death Strike, it gives you an Absorption Shield, and then it increases your attack power. On a Pale Horse, it is unchanged. Still increases your mount speed by 20%. Veteran of the Third War, from retrospect, it looks like a buff. Stamina increased by 50% and armor increased by 20%, because currently on live that is 15%. But I guess technically it's not really a buff because you won't have your artifact weapon anymore, and with your artifact weapon there is a trait that increases your armor by 2% for each point in it, so that is 8%, which can go even higher depending on your relics, making the 15% on live a 23% versus this 20%. So, I guess you're not really getting buffed. You can really look at it however you want. But anyways, let's go on to the talents. Now let's go over talents, and since PvP talents were introduced to the beta, I'll be going over these as well in case you care at all. Now for the talents, there are some that have changed a bit, there are some that are returning, and then there are some that are completely new. Versus like Frost talents where pretty much nothing was changed. There is actually some stuff changed with Blood. So let's go over them. Heartbreaker, well, this one is completely unchanged. Heartstrike generates 2 additional runic power per target hit. Blood Drinker is also unchanged. It drains health from the target over 2.7 seconds. I think that's actually 2.6 seconds on live, but what's 0.1 second gonna do? But anyways, it's difficult to tell if the drained health from this was nerfed at all, because it currently says 3,464, whereas on live it's 1 million, but there was a giant stat squish. So I think it might actually be slightly nerfed if you compare it. But anyways, Rune Strike. This is actually an ability that we've seen in the past, and it's returning. But it's pretty much completely new. It has a 1-minute recharge, 2 charges, and it generates 1 rune, and it does just physical damage, but the cooldown of it is reduced by 1 second for every rune that you spend. So that's actually pretty interesting. Rapid Decomposition was just nerfed slightly. It will no longer generate 1 runic power per second while you stand in it. Other than that, it still increases the damage of Blood Plague and Death and Decay by 15%. Hemostasis is new, I believe. Each enemy hit by Blood Boil increases the damage and healing done by your next Death Strike by 8%, and that stacks up to 5 times. Now Consumption was the Blood Decay artifact ability. It is now becoming a talent, so you can get it back if you really liked it. But in a talent form. So it does the exact same thing actually, it's not changed at all. 45-second cooldown, strikes all enemies in front of you, and then heals you for 100% of the damage that it dealt. Will of the Necropolis was not changed at all. The only change of it is that it was moved up to the 3rd tier, so your damage taken below 35% health is still reduced by 35%. Anti-magic barrier is still here, but it's pretty much completely changed. It will no longer increase your max health by 25%, but it reduces the cooldown of anti-magic shield by 15 seconds, and then increases its duration and amount absorbed by 30%. And then Rune Tap was just moved up to this tier, and it was just slightly changed. Still costs 1 rune, still has a 25-second recharge with 2 charges, but it'll now reduce all damage you take by 30% for 4 seconds, whereas on live, that is 40% for 3 seconds. For Tightening Grasp, well, besides them changing the icon of it, it was just, I guess, nerfed slightly. It no longer affects Death Grip. Like, Death Grip will not reduce the target's movement speed by 70%, but it still reduces the cooldown of Gorfine's Grasp by 30 seconds. Grip of the Dead is new, I believe. Death and Decay reduces the movement speed of enemies within its area by 90%, and that decays by 10% every second. Wraithwalk, as we talked about, is now becoming a talent because it was baseline before, and it's relatively unchanged. The only change of it is that its cooldown was changed from 45 seconds up to 1 minute, but it will still increase your movement speed by 70%, and you can't be slowed with it on. So now you can have 2 speed increasers if you pick Wraithwalk, because then you'll also have Death's Advance. Foul Bulwark was moved up a tier, and it has changed just slightly, nerfed slightly. Each charge of Bone Shield will increase your max health by 1%, whereas on live that is 2%. Ossuary, unchanged, and it was moved down. Tombstone, unchanged, and it was also moved down. Voracious is new. Death Strike grants you 15% leech for 6 seconds. And then Bloodworms were moved all the way down to this tier, and they were buffed slightly. The healing is still the same. Each Bloodworm explodes heals you for 15% of your missing health, and then if you drop below 50% health, all the Bloodworms will immediately burst and heal you. But the only change of it is that your auto attacks have a chance to summon Bloodworms, whereas on live, it's your auto attack crits. So now you have a greater chance of summoning Bloodworms. Mark of Blood was moved down just a couple tiers, and it was slightly nerfed. So it now has a 6-second cooldown, and the healing for it was changed down to 2%, whereas on live it's 3%. Purgatory, something that Death Knights have had since Death Knights were introduced, is completely unchanged. So that's nice. Red Thirst was nerfed slightly. It was moved down to this tier, and now it reduces the cooldown of Vampiric Blood by 1 second for every 10 runic power spent, instead of every 6 runic power. But then Bone Storm, slightly buffed. It still uses up 10 to 100 runic power, 1 minute cooldown, deals damage, but it will now heal you for 3% of your max health every time it deals damage, instead of 2% on live. Now for the PvP talents. If you did not watch my video going over how PvP talents will work in BFA, this is how it goes down. It's no longer going to be a tier system, it's just this thing that's tacked on to the side of your talents. You have 4 little bubbles here, they look like glyph bubbles. The top one is the same for everyone, no matter your class, your spec, and they give you Relentless, Gladiator's Medallion, or Adaptation. I could pick one of those 3, which is the same thing as the first tier on the current honor talents. Now the next 3 bubbles, it's just one giant pool of a bunch of the honor talents that we currently have. I think they just pruned down like a couple of them, maybe 3 of them or something. But other than that, all of these are currently our honor talents, and they're actually not changed whatsoever. So obviously seeing the main difference on live, they're a tier system. In BFA, it's a giant pool, so I can pick like 3 that are currently on the same tier on live. So I can pick like this one, I can pick that one, and I can pick that one if I wanted to. But as I mentioned, none of these are unchanged, their effects are not changed, so I'm just going to read the names off. And if you want to know what they do, well, you can look at your honor talents on live, or I guess you can pause the video because I will be putting my mouse over each of them. But there's Unholy Command, Walking Dead, Strangulate, Blood for Blood, Murderous Intent, Anti-Magic Zone, Necrotic Aura, Heartstop Aura, Decomposing Aura, Dark Simulacrum, Last Dance, and Death Chain. And those are all of the talents, PvP talents and normal talents. And those are all the changes for Blood Death Knights in Battle for Azeroth. That does sum up all of the overviews for Death Knights, since I made a video over Unholy and Frost changes, so make sure to check those out. But I'm a bit surprised at how unchanged GKs are. That's probably because I'm comparing it to, well, Hunters, which are changed a significant amount in BFA. But then again, it is beta, the expansion isn't coming out for another few months, August 14th, so if you guys like this video, you can leave a like on it, sub to the channel for more videos like this, and I'll see you in the next video.